There was a time when anyone would be scared and tremble upon hearing the name of George Soros. Also known as the most dangerous man in financial history, Soros wasn't just a billionaire.
This man is a carnivore of the first order.
Take 81,000 to buy. Buy 48,000. Buy him 69,000 YUM.
The Prime Minister of Malaysia. The region spent 40 years trying to build up its economy, and along comes a moron like Soros.
A few words from Soros were enough to cause panic selling that fueled the crash.
And the whole country falls apart.
He was one of the richest individuals in the entire history of mankind. His financial empire became an unstoppable force, wielding more power than many governments. Soros wasn't just a businessman, he was a conqueror, treating finance like warfare and taking no prisoners. Known as the man who broke the Bank of England, Soros earned his place in history as the ultimate financial speculator, able to devastate entire economies with just a few calculated moves. The United Kingdom, home to Oxford University and some of the greatest economists in history, couldn't withstand his brilliance. Russia's mighty government, the booming Thai economy, and even the Asian tigers like South Korea, all fell victim to his unrelenting strategies. Their currencies plummeted, debts skyrocketed, and the lives of millions were thrown into chaos. For nations across the globe, the mere mention of his name struck fear. But in 1997, Soros faced a new challenge, one that would prove to be one of his fiercest confrontations. That year, his financial storm reached Malaysia, a rising Southeast Asian economy. Waiting for him was his arch-enemy, the fearless Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. Mahathir wasn't just a politician. Known for his sharp wit and unshakable resolve, he was a leader fighting for his nation's economy and its survival. This was more than just an economic crisis. George Soros is a name that commands attention, and not always in a good way. Born in Hungary in 1930, Soros survived the horrors of World War II and the Holocaust before making his way to England. There, he studied at the London School of Economics, where he was introduced to the philosophies of Karl Popper, which deeply influenced his thinking. But while his academic background is fascinating, it's his career in finance that cemented his reputation and his infamy. Soros founded his first hedge fund, Double Eagle, in 1969. With the success of that venture, he went on to create the Quantum Fund, one of the most profitable hedge funds in history. By the 1980s and 1990s, Soros had risen to prominence as one of the most brilliant and ruthless financial minds the world had ever seen. He became known for his ability to predict market shifts and exploit them for massive gains. The moment that truly earned him the title of the man who broke the Bank of England came in 1992. Through a strategy called short selling, Soros bet against the British pound during a currency crisis, earning himself a staggering $1 billion profit in a single day. His actions shook the United Kingdom's economy, forcing it to withdraw from the European Exchange Rate Mechanism, ERM. For Soros, it was just another day at the office. For the UK, it was a financial disaster that left a lasting scar. Soros's ability to destabilize currencies wasn't limited to Europe. He turned his attention to economies across the globe, targeting weaknesses in financial systems. Countries like Thailand and South Korea suffered as Soros's speculative moves drained their economies of foreign currency reserves, sending their markets into a tailspin. It didn't matter whether a country was a global superpower or a developing economy. Soros played by one rule: win at all costs. But Soros wasn't just a financial predator. He was also a complex figure who wore many hats. To some, he was a philanthropic hero, donating billions of dollars to causes like education, healthcare, and democracy through his Open Society foundations. Yet to others, he was a shadowy figure, accused of using his wealth to manipulate governments and economies for his own gain. His influence was undeniable, but his methods were often controversial. By the time the Asian financial crisis hit in 1997, George Soros was already a living legend in the world of finance. His reputation preceded him. He was the man who could topple nations with a single trade. And when his financial storm reached Southeast Asia, Countries like Malaysia found themselves in the crosshairs of a man whose power seemed almost limitless. But what kind of leader could stand up to someone like Soros? Who would have the courage to challenge the man who had defeated so many nations before? Enter Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Malaysia's longest-serving Prime Minister and Soros's unexpected rival in one of the most dramatic economic battles in history. If George Soros is the name synonymous with global financial dominance, then Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad is the name etched into the story of Southeast Asia's resilience and defiance. Born in 1925 in Alor Setar, a small town in the northern state of Kedah, Malaysia, Mahathir's rise to prominence was anything but ordinary. From humble beginnings, he would go on to become Malaysia's longest-serving Prime Minister and one of the most influential leaders in Asia. Mahathir was not born into wealth or privilege. He pursued a career in medicine, becoming one of the first Malay doctors in colonial Malaya. But it wasn't long before his passion for nation building drew him into politics. By the 1960s, Mahathir was already making waves, advocating policies to empower Malaysia's majority Malay population economically and socially. His belief in self-reliance and determination would come to define his leadership. When he first became Prime Minister in 1981, Malaysia was a developing country heavily reliant on agriculture and raw materials like rubber and tin. Mahathir had a bold vision to transform Malaysia into a modern industrialized nation. Through his leadership, the country saw rapid economic development, infrastructure advancements, and the rise of key industries like electronics and manufacturing. One of Mahathir's earliest and most daring moves as Prime Minister was the Dawn Raid of 1981. Under his leadership, Malaysia orchestrated a covert financial operation that stunned the world. In less than 4 hours, Malaysia's Permodalan Nasional Berhad, PNB, successfully acquired a controlling stake in Guthrie Corporation, one of the UK's largest and most prestigious plantation companies. Guthrie owned vast tracts of Malaysian land, and the operation marked a symbolic reclaiming of national assets from its former colonizers. This financial takeover was a statement of Mahathir's resolve. It wasn't just about reclaiming economic control. It was about asserting Malaysia's sovereignty on the global stage. The UK was left reeling, with Guthrie's shareholders discovering the takeover through the radio.
Game over.
While Mahathir emerged as a bold strategic leader, willing to challenge Western dominance. The move cemented his legacy as a nationalist determined to elevate Malaysia. By the 1990s, Mahathir's leadership had propelled Malaysia into the ranks of the Asian Tigers, alongside nations like South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore. His Look East policy encouraged Malaysians to adopt the work ethics and technological advancements of countries like Japan and South Korea. Under his guidance, Malaysia's skyline transformed, with the iconic Petronas Twin Towers symbolizing the country's aspirations. But Mahathir's leadership was about to face its greatest challenge yet. George Soros was no ordinary adversary. He was powerful, clever, and utterly meticulous. A man who could dismantle economies with precision and speed. For Mahathir, this wasn't just a test of policies or leadership, it was a battle for Malaysia's survival. Could the defiant leader of a small Southeast Asian nation stand up to one of the most feared and formidable financial minds in history? The stage was set for an epic clash that would redefine the global economic landscape. The 1997 Asian financial crisis wasn't just another economic downturn, it was a catastrophe that sent shockwaves through the global economy. What began as a currency collapse in Thailand quickly spread across Southeast Asia, devastating economies like dominoes. At the center of this storm was Thailand's Baht, which had been pegged to the US dollar for over a decade at an exchange rate of around 25 Baht to 1 USD. This fixed rate provided stability and encouraged foreign investment, fueling Thailand's rapid economic growth. In fact, Thailand was a regional star, boasting a GDP of $183.35 billion in 1996, with a growth rate of 5.7%, one of the highest in Southeast Asia. The country's economy was booming, driven by real estate, tourism, and foreign investments. However, this prosperity was built on shaky foundations, rising debts, an overheated property market, and over-reliance on speculative capital. When cracks in the economy appeared, they quickly widened into a full-blown collapse. George Soros and other speculators saw this vulnerability and launched a massive attack on the baht. Soros short-sold the currency, betting that its value would fall. His strategy was devastatingly effective. Thailand's central bank burned through nearly $23 billion of its foreign reserves in a desperate attempt to defend the baht. But by July 1997, the pressure was too much. Thailand was forced to abandon its peg to the US dollar and let the baht float freely. Overnight, the baht's value plummeted, dropping from 25 baht to 1 USD to over 50 baht to 1 USD. The fallout was catastrophic. Thailand's largest bank, Bangkok Bank of Commerce, went bankrupt, sparking widespread panic in the financial sector. Businesses collapsed under the weight of dollar-denominated debts, which had effectively doubled overnight. Unemployment surged as companies downsized or shuttered entirely, leaving millions jobless. For many Thai families, the economic dream of the 1990s turned into a nightmare. By the end of 1997, Thailand's GDP had contracted to $150,180 billion, marking a sharp reversal and a contraction of 2.8%. Foreign workers who had once flocked to Thailand during its economic boom now left en masse in search of jobs elsewhere. Construction sites were abandoned, factories went silent, and the streets of Bangkok grew eerily quiet. What was once Asia's fastest-growing economy had suddenly become its weakest link, a tragic fall from grace that shocked the world. The collapse of Thailand's economy sent ripples across Southeast Asia. As foreign investors panicked, they pulled their money out of neighboring countries, fearing similar collapses. Malaysia, Indonesia, South Korea, and the Philippines saw their currencies plummet, stock markets crash, and foreign investments dry up. The crisis spread like wildfire, leaving devastation in its wake. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad and his Deputy Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim watched these events unfold with growing concern. They knew that Malaysia's ringgit was showing signs of vulnerability and that a speculative attack on their economy was imminent. Thailand's fall was a warning, a clear indication of what could happen if Malaysia wasn't prepared. Mahathir and Anwar understood that defending Malaysia wouldn't just be a battle for economic stability, it would be a fight for the nation's survival. With stakes this high, they were ready to take bold and decisive action, no matter the cost. The clock was ticking, and the question loomed. Could Malaysia avoid Thailand's fate? If Malaysia failed to defend their economy, Singapore will be the next as the last gate of Southeast Asia.
I mean, that is a real danger to open society, and I think what Mahathir is now doing is quite outrageous. He may be able to get away with it. It will become a very attractive model. That's what I'm afraid of.
As the 1997 Asian financial crisis deepened, Malaysia found itself in the crosshairs of global speculators. The crisis wasn't just a regional catastrophe, it was an economic assault, and Malaysia was one of its biggest targets. While the ringgit had been relatively stable in the early days, the events in Thailand sent shockwaves through investor confidence, making Malaysia vulnerable to speculative attacks. The Malaysian economy, once a beacon of Southeast Asia's success, faced an unprecedented crisis. The ringgit came under relentless pressure, falling from 2.5 to 1 USD to as low as 4.7 to 1 USD in a matter of months. This dramatic devaluation meant that Malaysia's import costs surged, hitting businesses and citizens alike. The value of the Kuala Lumpur Stock Exchange, KLSE, dropped by nearly 80%, wiping out billions in investments and leaving the financial sector dangerously exposed. Malaysia's banking system, which had thrived during the economic boom of the 1990s, now faced its greatest challenge. Many banks, heavily exposed to foreign loans, struggled to stay afloat as the ringgit's devaluation doubled the cost of their dollar-denominated debts. Non-performing loans, NPLs, surged, and what had once been a symbol of Malaysia's modernization was now on the brink of collapse. The impact on ordinary Malaysians was devastating. Thousands of businesses shuttered their doors, unable to cope with rising costs and plummeting revenues. Unemployment surged to over 4.5%, leaving tens of thousands jobless almost overnight. For those lucky enough to keep their jobs, salary cuts became the norm, with many workers seeing their wages slashed by 20–30%. The middle class, which had grown rapidly during the economic boom, now faced the harsh reality of diminished purchasing power and mounting debts. For Malaysian families, the crisis wasn't just an economic downturn, it was a personal catastrophe. Savings evaporated, homes were lost, and dreams of a better future were shattered. With inflation soaring and the cost of living rising, even basic necessities became a struggle for many. The sense of despair was widespread as the nation grappled with the worst economic crisis in its history. The world watched Malaysia with sad eyes. The United States, Malaysia's largest investor, along with the IMF and the World Bank, called an emergency meeting in Hong Kong to address the escalating crisis in Southeast Asia. Global leaders, economists, and financial institutions convened to discuss strategies to stabilize the region. For Malaysia, this meeting represented both a lifeline and a stage for a pivotal showdown. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Malaysia's resolute Prime Minister, had his sights set on George Soros. He publicly blamed the billionaire speculator for deliberately targeting Malaysia, profiting from the suffering of its citizens, and destabilizing economies across the region. In a series of fiery speeches, Mahathir condemned Soros as the architect of the crisis, calling out the dark side of financial speculation. The emergency meeting in Hong Kong wasn't just a gathering of minds, it was a battlefield of ideologies. On one side stood George Soros, a financial powerhouse with a reputation for breaking economies. On the other was Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, a leader determined to protect his nation's sovereignty and people. The world held its breath as these two titans prepared to clash, each representing conflicting visions of global finance. This wasn't just about Malaysia's economy, it was about its future. How could a small Southeast Asian nation stand up to the immense forces of global speculation? As Mahathir and Soros prepared to face each other, the stakes couldn't have been higher. The stage was set, and the world eagerly awaited the outcome of one of the most dramatic moments in modern economic history.
Major concerns about the banking system and the collapse of some of the conglomerates. I think it is an embarrassment. Furthermore, I think it has hurt Malaysia that we have seen a direct correlation between some of these outrageous allegations and the fall in the currency in Malaysia as well as the stock market.
I am saying that currency trading is unnecessary, unproductive, and totally immoral. Society must be protected from unscrupulous profiteers.
The crisis was reaching its peak, and the emergency meeting in Hong Kong became the epicenter of global economic debate. The IMF, with its $17 billion USD bailout offer, seemed like a lifeline for Malaysia. But this lifeline came with chains attached. The terms were brutal. Government would have to eliminate subsidies on essential goods, leaving the people to face skyrocketing prices for everyday necessities like eggs, cooking oil, gas, electricity, healthcare, education, and even basic staples like chicken and meat in the markets. For a nation already suffering, this was an unbearable prospect. The IMF also demanded that Malaysia open its markets to foreign control, allowing international investors to acquire stakes in the nation's largest companies. Iconic institutions like Petronas, Proton, Sime Darby, Genting, and Malaysia airports would no longer be in Malaysian hands. The fear was clear. These companies, symbols of Malaysia's economic independence, could be reduced to mere pawns in the global economy. Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad found himself in a deep dilemma. Accepting the IMF's terms might stabilize the economy in the short term, but it would come at the expense of the Malaysian people's livelihoods and the nation's sovereignty. For decades, the government had provided subsidies to make life affordable for its citizens, cushioning the impact of rising costs. But agreeing to the IMF's conditions meant dismantling these safety nets, leaving millions vulnerable. Mahathir understood the stakes. If Malaysia surrendered to the IMF, the very fabric of its society would unravel. The salaries of ordinary Malaysians, already diminished due to inflation and the falling ringgit, wouldn't be enough to cover basic expenses. Families would struggle to afford food, electricity, or education for their children. The middle class, which had been growing steadily during the economic boom of the 1990s, would collapse into poverty. The demands on Malaysia's corporate sector were equally dire. Foreign control over strategic assets like Petronas, the country's oil and gas giant, and Proton, its national car manufacturer, would strip Malaysia of its economic independence. These companies were not just businesses, they were national pride, symbols of progress, and pillars of the economy. Losing them would mean losing control over Malaysia's future. Adding to Mahathir's turmoil was the mocking attitude of George Soros. While the IMF presented its terms, Soros reportedly laughed at Malaysia's vulnerability, viewing it as just another chapter in his financial conquest. To him, Malaysia was merely a pawn in the larger game of global finance, a nation too small to fight back and too dependent to survive on its own. For Mahathir, this wasn't just an economic decision, it was a moral and existential one. Surrendering to the IMF would mean admitting defeat, not just for Malaysia, but for its people and its dreams of independence. He faced immense pressure from all sides, global institutions, international investors, and even his own government officials, some of whom believed the IMF bailout was the only way forward. But Mahathir couldn't shake the image of ordinary Malaysians, workers, farmers, families, struggling to survive under the weight of IMF austerity. He knew that any decision made in Hong Kong would ripple through every corner of Malaysia, affecting millions of lives. The stakes couldn't have been higher, and Mahathir had to make a choice: bow to international pressure or fight back with everything Malaysia had left. With Malaysia on the brink of collapse, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad made a decision that shocked the world. He rejected the IMF's $17 billion USD bailout and its harsh terms, opting instead to take a defiant stand against the forces of global finance. This was not just an economic decision, it was a declaration of sovereignty, a refusal to let Malaysia be dictated by foreign powers. Mahathir introduced a series of bold and unprecedented measures. The ringgit was pegged at 3.8 to the US dollar, effectively stabilizing its value and shielding it from further speculative attacks. Strict capital controls were imposed to stop the outflow of funds, preventing foreign speculators from destabilizing the currency any further. These measures were risky, unconventional, and flew in the face of global financial norms, but Mahathir was determined to protect Malaysia at all costs. To many, these actions were a gamble. Western financial institutions criticized Mahathir's approach, warning that Malaysia would isolate itself from the global economy. George Soros himself dismissed these measures as desperate and ineffective. Yet for Malaysia, this was a fight for survival, a fight to preserve its people's livelihoods and its economic independence. The effects of these policies were immediate. The ringgit stabilized, giving businesses a much-needed lifeline to plan their operations without the fear of further devaluation. Malaysia's banking system, though battered, avoided a complete collapse as capital controls prevented a full-blown liquidity crisis. The stock market, which had lost nearly 80% of its value, began to show signs of recovery as confidence slowly returned. While the IMF advised Malaysia to cut government spending, Mahathir did the exact opposite. He doubled down on public expenditure, using government resources to stimulate the economy and reignite growth. One of his most surprising moves was to announce bonuses for government servants, ensuring that morale remained high and people had money to spend. This was a shocking move at a time when other nations were slashing public sector wages under IMF pressure. Singapore, known for its strategic and calculated financial strategies, was taken aback by Mahathir's defiance. The tiny island nation, often hailed as an economic miracle, watched closely as Malaysia charted a course that seemed both daring and reckless. For Singapore, this was uncharted territory, a leader not only resisting the IMF, but actively challenging global economic orthodoxy. To boost Malaysia's visibility and attract tourists, Mahathir turned to Petronas, Malaysia's oil and gas giant, and tasked them with bringing Formula One to the country. This wasn't just about sports. It was a calculated effort to place Malaysia on the world map and draw international attention to its resilience. The Sepang International Circuit, built in record time, became a symbol of Malaysia's ambition and determination. Mahathir's creativity didn't stop there. He asked his ministers to develop a national branding logo, promoting Malaysian best products. This initiative encouraged local businesses to rise to global standards while fostering national pride. To further stimulate consumer spending, he launched the Mega Sale campaign, a nationwide event that slashed prices and enticed both locals and tourists to spend, effectively boosting the retail sector during a time of crisis. One of Mahathir's most visionary projects was the establishment of University Utara Malaysia, UUM, in the rural state of Kedah. Unlike traditional urban-centric universities, UUM was designed to pioneer human capital development and business management education in the northern region. This move wasn't just about education, it was about decentralizing economic opportunities and stimulating growth in less developed areas, proving that rural Malaysia had a role to play in the country's recovery. Each of these initiatives defied the IMF's recommendations. While the global financial community expected Malaysia to contract and retrench, Mahathir's strategy focused on expansion and innovation. His goal was clear: to keep Malaysians spending, working, and believing in their country's future. It was a bold gamble that few leaders would have dared to make. Mahathir's defiance also carried a symbolic weight. He showed the world that Malaysia wasn't just a victim of the crisis, but a nation willing to fight back on its own terms. While other nations in the region implemented IMF-imposed austerity measures, leading to widespread public unrest, Malaysia maintained relative stability by preserving its social safety nets and giving people hope during one of the darkest periods in the nation's history. The results of Mahathir's unconventional strategy began to show. The ringgit stabilized, the banking sector avoided complete collapse, and industries slowly started to recover. The government's initiatives, from promoting tourism to supporting local businesses, helped create a sense of unity and purpose, which was essential for rebuilding a shattered economy. Each of these initiatives defied the IMF's recommendations. While the IMF proposed raising interest rates to combat inflation and stabilize the currency, Mahathir went the other way, slashing interest rates to encourage borrowing. This move allowed businesses to access affordable loans, restart their operations, and create jobs. As businesses flourished, employment rose, and more money began circulating in the economy, creating a ripple effect of recovery and growth. This strategy, bold and unconventional, completely stunned the IMF and defied every expectation of how a nation should respond to a financial crisis. Through his boldness and refusal to bow to external pressures, Mahathir not only shielded Malaysia from further devastation, but also cemented his legacy as a leader who stood firm against overwhelming odds. His actions during the crisis became a blueprint for how smaller nations could resist external exploitation and chart their own paths to recovery. The 1997 Asian financial crisis left its mark on Southeast Asia, but Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad's bold moves shocked the world, and even George Soros himself. The unorthodox strategies employed by Mahathir forced Soros and other money speculators to halt their attacks not just on Malaysia, but on other nations like Indonesia, South Korea, and Thailand. What had started as a relentless wave of economic sabotage came to an abrupt pause, leaving Southeast Asia to pick up the pieces. The damage across the region was uneven. South Korea, though badly hit, managed to recover relatively quickly, thanks to a bailout package from the IMF. However, the story was starkly different for Thailand and Indonesia, where the wounds of the crisis still linger. These nations, burdened with IMF loans, continue to grapple with the long-term consequences of the crisis. Their economies have yet to fully regain the momentum they had before the storm, and the cost of servicing IMF debts remains a heavy burden to this day. For Malaysia, Mahathir's refusal to bow to the IMF marked a turning point. His decisive actions not only shielded the nation from further harm, but also sent a message to the world. Malaysia would not be bullied into submission. The results of his bold leadership extended beyond Malaysia's borders, offering hope to other developing nations that they, too, could resist the overwhelming forces of global finance. This confrontation may very well have been George Soros's last major speculative attack. Having left his company to his son, Soros shifted his focus toward philanthropy in the years that followed. The 1997 crisis became a defining chapter in his controversial career, cementing his reputation as a financial speculator capable of influencing the fate of entire nations. As for Mahathir Mohamad, his tenure as Prime Minister came to an end in 2003 when he handed the reins to his successor. His legacy as a leader who defied the odds and stood up to one of the most powerful men in global finance endures to this day. Today, Anwar Ibrahim, Mahathir's former protege, leads Malaysia. The nation Mahathir helped save during its darkest economic hour is now navigating new challenges under Anwar's leadership. The legacy of the 1997 Asian financial crisis serves as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration for the resilience of nations like Malaysia, which managed to rise from the ashes of economic turmoil.